everyone, and welcome on into another edition of Eye on the Enemy, here part of the Eagles Pin Pull Network. I'm your host, John Stolnis. I'm a writer for BleedingGreenNation.com and a podcaster here for the Eagles Pin Pull Network. And this is the podcast where we take a deep dive into the opponent the Eagles are going to be playing that week. And of course, this week we are taking on the Green Bay Packers on the tradition of Friday night football coming your way as the Eagles and Packers get ready to take on each other from Brazil in what could be an NFC Championship game preview. So we're going to cover all the angles for you here on this edition of Eye on the Enemy. We're going to talk with Peter Bukowski. He is the host of the Locked On Packers podcast, as well as the host of the Locked On Sports Today podcast. We're going to get all of the ins and outs having to do with the Packers ahead of Friday night's game. And hey, listen, we're going to also give you my Eagles predictions for the season and my NFL predictions. I'll give you my division winners, wild cards, and playoff predictions, including my Super Bowl prediction, all on this episode of Eye on the Enemy. Well, let's dive into this game that we've been waiting months for. It's happening in Brazil, which I know is unusual for folks. A Friday night game. Again, not the usual way we start off a season, but it's a marquee matchup in the NFC. The Eagles taking on the Packers. And joining me to talk about what we can expect from Green Bay this Friday night is Peter Bukowski. He's the host of the Locked On Packers podcast, as well as the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Peter, welcome to Eye on the Enemy. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. It's hard to think about a more fun way to start this prime time, an NFC contender. I actually don't like starting with divisional games, so to get to do it with a conference kind of rival instead of a divisional rival, I'm pretty excited about it.
So rank for me your area of preference in terms of how you like to start the season. You say you don't like with a divisional rival, you like with a conference rival. How do you feel about like an AFC team starting off the season that way?
No, that's a hard pass. Like I don't like college football where you're going to start, first of all, with like, you know, our sisters of perpetual sorrow. Like I hate that.
Yeah.
And I kind of like, you know, USC, LSU. That's a fun way to start, like a ranked team.
Yeah.
That's not your direct competitor week in, week out, but is another really good team. I guess if this were Packers Texans, I have to be honest, I'd be pretty juiced about that.
Sure.
But like if we flipped week 1 and week 2, or like week 1 and week 3, and it's the Colts or the Titans, it would be hard for me to be this excited about it. Even if like those teams could be playoff teams, right? But
yeah,
it would just be, there'd be a different level of intensity, I think.
I'm not. And maybe I think I'm in the minority on this, but I hate the fact that they're starting off in Brazil. Like these are two storied franchises. I mean, I want this game to either be in Lambeau or at Lincoln Financial Field, where the fan base is going to really get behind it. You know, it's going to be a real test for one team or the other. And these are two Super Bowl contenders. They may end up being the teams that meet in the NFC Championship game. I mean, they really have rosters that could very well find themselves each one step away from the Super Bowl. And I'm concerned that starting off in Brazil, the travel and everything else, that it's going to maybe set one team back, or maybe the losing team gets them off on a real bad foot, because not only do you lose opening week, you're making this trip to Europe, and it's a fast trip. Like nobody's going there to hang out and relax. It's like you're getting in there. I mean, the Eagles just landed here on Wednesday night. They're going to play on Friday night and then leave right away. Like it's like they're going to Chicago but overseas. You know, I'm not a fan of this in week 1. Maybe week 10 or week 5, something like that, starting off the season in Brazil. How do you feel?
I'm of two minds about this, because I do think if you're going to do it, I kind of think week 1 is the week to do it. Like week 1 is going to be weird anyway. So let's just get really real weird. Right. And so I think that could be part of the calculus here. I also remember 2 years ago, the Packers went to London in early October, late September. I don't remember the exact timing of it. I think it was late September. It was early in the season, and they weren't right for like a month after that. Yeah. And they decided that you get the option when you go overseas to have your bye after the game. And the Packers said, no, we want it at a different time. And their hope was they could get it later, which would make it more beneficial later in the season. And they come back from losing to the Giants, and in a game in which, by the way, they could not tackle Saquon Barkley. And they get absolutely worked by the New York Jets. And we're talking about non-Aaron Rodgers New York Jets. This was an Aaron Rodgers Packers team.
Okay.
And then they lose to the Commanders. And it's just sort of like to Taylor Heineke and the Commanders, no less. And so it set them on a really bad path. They did not look like themselves until mid-November. And so I actually would prefer, if you're going to go do this, my preference would be to not Packers Eagles play in Brazil. But
Yeah.
if you're going to do this, now is, I think, the best time for these two teams, and more optimally for the Packers to not have to go to Philadelphia at any point in the regular season is
Fair
also
enough.
a good thing. If you're the Eagles, you're probably going, no way would we have wanted to give up not just a home game, but a home game against an NFC contender.
Yeah.
That's really not what you want. And by the way, this is a Brazilian fan base that is probably going to be pro Packers. I was speaking to a Brazilian reporter who said he thinks it's going to be like 75-25 Packers fans.
Wow.
Now, whether or not that has an impact on the outcome, I don't know. But the Packers are the number one team in the NFL in Brazil. So it's a plurality, not a majority. I think it's like 20% of fans, but
Interesting.
20% of, it's a country, 200 million people live there. Like it's a big country. There's a real football fan base. So that's an interesting part of this too.
Interesting. And that is curious, like why the Packers have been the team that grabs hold in a place like Brazil more than any other team. Is it Brett Favre? I mean,
No,
is it Aaron?
I was told it is legitimately as simple as the colors.
Yeah, okay.
Green and yellow.
All right. Okay, yeah, all right. I guess that's fair. There are dumber ways to choose a team that you that you really
For
that you
sure.
really like.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. The line on this game's 2.5 points favoring the Eagles, and I'm surprised by that, given how the Eagles season finished last year. Given that the Packers seem to be a team on the rise, given that they went further in the playoffs last year and gave the 49ers all they could handle after whooping up on the Cowboys, which, by the way, was just a delight to watch. It's one of the reasons why Jordan Love is perhaps my favorite non-Eagle player right now, because the way he carved up the Cowboys in that playoff game was just chef's kiss. And so it's one of those things where, he kind of earned a special place in all of our hearts a little bit. So, I mean, they were really impressive. They're a young team. They look like a team. Matt LaFleur is a really underrated head coach. When you talk about the best head coaches in the NFL, rarely does his name come up, and yet he just keeps churning out 11, 12, 13 win seasons here.
Yeah, 3 straight 13-win seasons to start his career as a Packers head coach, not like a place where there's no pressure or anything like that, or there's no, like, I don't know, let's say famously dramatic and pugnacious quarterbacks that might be going to the Hall of Fame someday that he might have had to deal with. Like, I think in retrospect, we have to give even a little bit more respect to what Matt LaFleur did, given what we now know about players like Aaron Rodgers. And look, Devontae Adams doesn't seem like he's particularly happy again in Las Vegas. So it's like, okay, he managed all that. They won 13 games every year.
Yeah. Yeah, and you look at Aaron Rodgers' playoff history, any shortcomings in the postseason may not necessarily have been Matt LaFleur, so you can trace all that back to any number of different things. My main question is, are you surprised that the Eagles are favored in this game?
Yeah, I am. And when the line first came out, I went, this game's in Brazil, right? Like, I didn't imagine that. And so, like, because I think at Lincoln Financial, I can understand it. In Philly, 2.5. It's week 1. This is a team that has so much to prove. I mean, I was just talking to Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles, and I had said to him, I think there's an abnormal amount of pressure on Philadelphia in this game. And given the way that the season ended, from what, 10-1 to 11-7 or whatever it was. Yeah. I mean, just an absolutely brutal way to finish. I wrote a piece in The Leap, a newsletter I would love for your audience to subscribe to, about that. I think it's the worst regular season collapse since anything related to the Mets, which might be hard for Philly fans to hear.
No, it's fair.
Like, that's what it was.
Peter, we know.
Well, I mean, just to have it happen, and then also to have it compared to, the Mets, your rival team.
Sure.
We don't want anything to do with the Mets, right?
Yeah.
So I was pretty surprised. But I'll be honest, and again, I don't think Eagles fans are going to love this. I kind of don't get the hype around this team right now at all, because not just because of the way the season finished, but because I look at this team and I think there has been a meaningful talent atrophy over the last few seasons. I think losing Fletcher Cox is not something that can just be hand waved. And I don't think Howie Roseman has done as good a job as the narrative suggests in building this team with players that I'm confident are going to be good this year. I don't know what I've seen, what anyone has seen, frankly, from Nolan Smith in the NFL to make them believe that he is an impact pass rusher. I don't know. Like, Jordan Davis, I think for what he is a nice player. Can he play more than 20 snaps a game And how useful is he if he can't? I think Jalen Carter is incredible.
Yeah.
But it's not like they've got 14 Jalen Carters on this team. They have
Right.
one.
Right.
And so I guess I don't see the levels of talent that other people do. And look, I could be wrong about that. It wouldn't be the first time, won't be the last time. But I look at this team and I go, okay, the receivers are awesome, especially at the top. The interior is very good. I like some of the pass rushers. Bryce Huff has never been a full-time player. Can he be at 6'3", 250? Can he be a full-time player? Can he play early downs? Can these linebackers be NFL caliber? And by the way, the Packers had that same question. So
Yeah.
this is, it takes one to know one in that regard. But and they're asking a lot of rookie corners. And that is a scary proposition. I have a saying on Locked On Packers that most rookies are bad. Even players who turn out to be good are usually bad, and corners are the worst.
Mm-hmm.
No rookies are usually worse than rookie corners.
Yeah.
And so to have Quinyon Mitchell, who I guess is going to play the slot, that can you explain that to me? Like Isaiah Rodgers is like 5'10", 170, and he's a boundary corner. Quinyon Mitchell is 6'1", 205, and a slot corner. What is happening there?
Well, Quinyon is going to probably play on the outside in the base defense, and then in nickel, which again, they play a lot, obviously.
Yeah, 75-80% of the time.
Yeah, he'll move inside, and Rodgers, and I think you're going to see a healthy dose of Keely Ringo too on the outside, and Keely Ringo's got a little bit more size than Isaiah Rodgers.
He's a big corner.
Rodgers made a lot of plays in the summer. I mean, he really did look good in training camp. He acquitted himself really well, and so I think the Eagles are feeling like they want a little bit more veteran presence on the outside, and they can have Quinyon on the field. And Quinyon was, he's covering A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith in these summer training camps and holding his own against both of them the entire summer. So I think there's a reasonable amount of optimism for him to be able to move outside, inside, whatever it is, that he might be kind of like not as good as Patrick Surtain, because that's a high bar, but like have a rookie season that is impactful in a good way. And so I think that's the idea with being able, and Vic Fangio wants to use him on virtually every down. So he's going to bounce outside and inside. And hey, listen, everything you just said is totally fair. 100% fair. I'm very concerned about the loss of Hassan Reddick. I don't know what they're going to get out of the pass rush. I'm not at all sold on Jordan Davis and on Nolan Smith.
They just like forgot how to tackle for the second half of last year.
They wore down. I think that the issue with the interior guys, Carter and Davis got hurt a little bit in his rookie year, so he didn't play a full 17 games. It was Carter's first year. He wasn't ready for the rigors of a 17-game season. I think both of those guys have come in better shape. Carter looks like an animal, but I haven't seen much from Jordan Davis this summer to say, yes, he's going to make the leap here in year number 3. Nakobe Dean was one of those guys who big things were expected of him his first couple of seasons here and didn't really deliver due to injury and underperformance when he was on the field. But in the summertime,
copy-paste Quay Walker in Green Bay, same thing. Georgia linebackers that are underperforming, even with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in front of him, and Quay Walker has the same benefit playing behind Kenny Clark and Carl Brooks and Devontae Wyatt, and both these fronts are going to be really good. I mean, I think this game in a lot of ways is going to come down to which group holds up better in both facets. Can the Packers pressure Jalen Hurts with 4? Because if they can, then this gets very interesting for the Green Bay defense, because Jeff Hafley, who's coming over from Boston College, was one of the most blitz-happy defensive play callers in college football. And that is the biggest problem that the Eagles had last year, was they had no answers for pressure. And not just blitzes, but pressure, but especially the blitz. Like, hey, they have more than we can block. We need an answer right now. They did not have hot game plans. And it's one of those things where it's week 1. Like, even if Kellen Moore is going to get there, can it be ready for week 1? I think Jeff Hafley is going to test them. And this is one of the fascinating things I would love to get your perspective on, John. The Packers are going to try and play a style of defense that most teams are not trying to play right now. Single high, a bunch of man coverage, blitz, where a lot of teams are trying to play this Vic Fangio style of, let's put a lid on it. No big plays. You're going to have to go 75 yards in 15 plays, not 5. No way. And the Packers are kind of like, Jeff Hafley was brought in to go, screw that. Like, we're bringing pressure. We're going to play press man coverage, and we're going to dare you to take real shots down the field when that's the best thing the Eagles, that was at times last year the only way the
only thing
offense
they had.
could do. And so it's sort of like, okay, do you want to play that variance game if you're the Packers? And I've been wondering if what we might see from this Packers defense is a little bit of fool's gold in week 1, in that I think they might end up playing more quarters, more cover 2 than we see over the course of the season. Precisely because that's the one thing that the Eagles were pretty confident they'll be able to do no matter what. But just me saying that out loud, and I've been saying it all week, and I've been wondering all week, like, that's anathema to the way that Jeff Hafley has preached his defense, wanting to dictate terms. We're not afraid of what they're going to do. We're going to dictate terms. We're going to do what we want to do to you. And so that tells me they're coming after Jalen Hurts. No one in college football last year ran more zero pressures on third down and in the red zone. So they better have answers for all out pressure. And I think that the Packers are gonna live by the sword and die by the sword in this one. I think it has a recipe to be fireworks. I think this is gonna be a high scoring game. I think this is gonna be so fun. I can't wait.
Yeah, I like to think that the Eagles have more answers this year than they did a year ago because, like you said, Kellen Moore, maybe he doesn't have the entire thing fixed in week 1. But I think Jalen Hurts has more options at his disposal. Jason Kelce leaving has required Jalen Hurts to take on more of the personnel matchups at the line of scrimmage than he'd ever had before. Jason Kelce used to take care of all of that, and they just told Jalen Hurts, don't worry about any of that. Jason's got that under control. With that now being in Jalen's control, maybe he then has a little bit more control over hot reads, making sure that different guys are picked up so that everybody sees everything. You've also got in Saquon Barkley now, a guy who's probably not going to come off the field the way DeAndre Swift did or Kenny Gainwell did. So you have a guy who can actually catch the ball out of the backfield as an outlet against the blitz on some occasions. And you can actually run some designed, running back passing plays when you think the blitz is coming or when you see the blitz is coming to get the ball out quick to slow guys down a little bit. And I'll be interested to see how Jahan Dotson works into all this as well. I'm not super high on his acquisition, but I think in the way that they use him there, it's good. I think if they do that, if they can figure out a way to kind of get this all blocked up, then you're sending AJ Brown down the field and Devontae Smith down the field. That's Hurts' deep ball. That's, like you said, one of his best attributes. And so if they can get the protection worked out, which, your NFL players, blitzes are not new. Like, you should be able, they didn't just invent this defensive concept 2 years ago and things are like the wildcat, we're not trying to figure out how to stop something that's just fresh off the drawing board here. So I think Kellen Moore has answers for it. We'll see if the players execute it well enough, but we'll also see if, I think one of the other things last year was Jalen Hurts couldn't run. From the beginning of the season, he couldn't run. We don't know what it was. He didn't have an injury. I don't think he came into the season as physically and mentally prepared as he had in previous seasons. I think the shortened off season, I think all of the attention that he was getting, the new contract, all that kind of stuff, the obligations on his time. I don't think he came into the season physically and mentally in as good a shape as he is coming in this season. So one of the best ways you beat the blitz is the quarterback taking off. Finding that spot, finding that alley up the middle, finding that way around. You can really slow guys down, so you have to mush rush, and you can't do quite as much. There's ways around it. The Eagles just, in the last 7 weeks last week, decided we don't want to do it. And there was no Nick Sirianni just absolutely would not alter the game plan to figure it out, and that's one of the big mysteries of the 23 season as to why Sirianni just was absolutely refused to make adjustments.
And I said on Locked On Packers on the Thursday show that it'll come out Thursday. We're recording this Wednesday, but I recorded that show Wednesday too. This is the magic of radio, right?
Yeah.
That the key matchup to me is the Packers edge contain and Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back and you look at that 2022 game, over 100 yards rushing for Jalen Hurts in that game. And almost all of them were not designed runs. It was scrambling. It was making plays outside the pocket. Yeah. Now, that was a different group. The Packers have added to that interior defensive line. It's now odd front, even front. There are going to be some changes there. I think there's going to be some intention changes, right? So this is going to be a team that now wants to disrupt, get up the field, and create more penetration, more TFLs, that kind of stuff. How do you do that while also understanding you need to play discipline? You need to play your responsibilities, and you need to not let Jalen Hurts have a lane to step through and then be off to the races. And so that's the interesting push-pull that the Packers are going to have to go through. I think what you're going to see is a lot of stuff where they're trying to disguise pre-snap what is coming, who is coming, some simulated pressures, spinning safeties, where it's just a lot of like Jalen Hurts having to navigate that stuff. Okay, I hear you. Jalen Hurts taking on those responsibilities, setting protections, reading the defense. Okay, but it was a nice security blanket last year to have Jason Kelce doing that, and for him doing it your whole career, basically.
Yeah.
Now in game one in prime time against a really good front four for the Packers and a defensive coordinator that's going to throw exotic looks at you. Now let's see how ready are you really?
Right.
And so I do wonder if it's a game where the Packers are kind of catching the Eagles at the perfect time to take advantage of the things that they don't do well. Whereas if this game happened in week 10, or let's say we get a rematch, you mentioned NFC could be a NFC championship game preview. Like if there's a rematch in January, that all of a sudden now the dynamic has changed. To me, going back to your question about the line here, and I don't want to, preempt if you want to make predictions, but I think the difference for me is I think these teams are very even. The reason I think the Packers are going to win, the reason I've put my money where my mouth is and bet on the Packers to win, is they have more continuity. I think the offensive continuity for the Packers, where they're not trying to reinvent the wheel on the fly. They're trying to evolve. They're going from, a Civic to they traded that Civic in and now it's a Maserati. And let's go see how fast that baby can rip on the freeway, right? And so I think for me, that's going to be the difference. Where again, I think the Eagles, talent-wise, like they have the talent to be the best offense in the league.
Yeah.
But is it going to look that way in week one? Are they going to have all their problems from last year solved in week one? I find that hard to believe, but doesn't mean it won't happen, right? Like talent can just win out sometimes.
Well, as Eagles fans, we are more than willing to admit that I think there's such a wide variance of directions in which this season could go. There is absolutely a realistic and plausible scenario where this team is a 13-win team again. They're one of the best teams in the NFC. They get to the Super Bowl. They win the Super Bowl. That's all possible. It's also possible that things, the head coach being here and the new coordinators, and there's meetings of the mind that don't quite work. Missing Jason Kelce, missing Fletcher Cox hurts more than anybody wants to admit. Saquon Barkley gets hurt, or he's not. They can't find the right role for him in this offense. Jalen Hurts is more like 2023 Hurts than 2022 Hurts, and this is a 6 or 7 win season. And Nick Sirianni is getting fired at the end of the year, and everything blows up. Those are, and then everything in the middle is also possible with this Eagles team as well. We really don't have a sense at all how this team's going to play. We didn't see anybody in the preseason either. We didn't see any starters. So there's no, all we hear is the reporting from training camp and from the joint practices, and that's all we really have to go on. So as Eagles fans, we're just we're in wait and see mode at the moment. We're ready to fire somebody if something goes wrong, and we'll see. We'll see kind of how it all shakes out.
This seems to me, John, sorry to interrupt, but it seems to me a little bit, and maybe I'm overreacting and just sort of feeding into the drama of it a little bit, but I have never been particularly impressed with Nick Sirianni as a head coach. I interviewed him 5 or 6 years ago when he was in Indy and was actually very impressed with him as a position coach. But as a head coach, I kind of feel like he's in an office space talking to the Bobs, and they're going, "What is it exactly you say it is you do here?"
We've made that joke a million. You're 100% right. That is a meme that has been going around here for the last couple of months.
I understand your point of like, okay, they're just waiting for this to go bad so that they can fire him, and it does feel a little bit like, okay, you have the Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni marriage. They're already in a trial separation, and Jalen Hurts has his new girlfriend who's coming home, but Nick Sirianni still lives in the guest bedroom, and it's sort of like, okay, is this just awkward? Like now Kellen Moore is running the offense, and you needed according to the Athletic reporting, like you needed a buffer in the room because these guys couldn't even be in the same room together. That doesn't seem great. I don't know. Like I'm not an expert on inter locker room politics, but that just doesn't seem great to me. So
no.
I wrote about this. I said this. I think that the Packers have a chance to, if they come out and get a decisive win, to strike a pretty decisive blow to an NFC contender, because I do think, to your point, like you're 1 or 2 bad months from the wheels falling off here. which isn't to say they can't go 13-4. I think they absolutely can. But this is also, I see a very real scenario where like it's Thanksgiving and they're going, okay, interim head coach Vic Fangio or
Yeah.
interim head coach Kellen Moore.
Yeah, we all see that too. I mean, I think it's more likely than not that things work out better, but it's not 90-10. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's nowhere close to that. And so like we're all resigned to the fact that it could very well tank. And then there's all kinds of question marks about what how this team moves forward. Couple other things before I let you go. I did want to talk about Jordan Love. You know, he is obviously one of the NFL's rising stars. He got paid this offseason, and I know there were some folks who were like, isn't it a little early? Has he done enough? I mean, did you see the kid? He's obviously worth the money. What kind of expectations are reasonable for him entering the season? We all know, I think, what the ceiling could be, but what do you think reasonable expectations are for him here in 2024?
I think the version of Love that you saw last year, just a little bit more consistently. You know, some of the bad decision making that we saw just crop up here and there. The Raiders game where he makes basically two blind throws that end up as interceptions on the same concept, which, by the way, does not actually have a read on it. I was talking to a Packers player who was like, the way the concept is taught, the quarterback just assumes it's going to work basically. So you come off play action and you've got this in-breaking route, and it's a concept that the Eagles have run as well, with that drive post, and he threw it twice and it wasn't there either time, and you're just sort of like, okay, what, like, you can't. It's actually the same concept Christian Watson scored on against the Eagles in 2022, or a version of that same concept. So that kind of stuff was kind of taken out of the offense because they didn't ask him to do that. They said, okay, you can actually play quarterback, Jordan. So let's just have you go play quarterback. And that unlocked it for him when he wasn't being babied. Like the worst version of Jordan Love was the version where they were kind of babying him.
Okay.
And once he proved, and it was really the Steelers game where he's making some throws and guys are looking at each other on the sidelines like, what is that? Like, that's special. The players point to that game. The coaches point to that game. That's a game they lost again. But he made some throws in that game where everyone just went, okay.
Yeah.
And the season took off from there. And so it's the consistency of the decision making. We know he has the arm talent. It's being able to walk the line. Like he's sort of a mix of Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre in that when you want him to play in structure, he can look like Aaron Rodgers. And when he wants to make a play outside structure and do something totally crazy and stupid that maybe he shouldn't do in ways that Aaron Rodgers wouldn't, Jordan Love will in ways that Brett Favre would. And so it's kind of funny that he's the third of this group because you see the traits of both. Not that he's going to be on that level. Like we're not, that's not what I'm saying. But it's finding that consistency is really the next step for him. And if he does that, like, come on, man, the sky is the limit for this kid. Like he can be as good as any quarterback in the league. And in the second half last year, he was the best quarterback in the league last year for the last 8 weeks. And then in the playoffs. Yeah.
One of the hottest runs we've seen from a quarterback in the NFC in a number of years. And so there's definitely a high ceiling on Jordan Love and the Packers offense here. All right. Last thing, prediction time. I think you alluded to it. Give me your prediction for Friday night.
I like points. I think there's gonna be a lot of points in this game. I think this is something like 27-24, 30-27, something like that. I think the Packers squeak one out. I think they make one more play. How about this? The Packers drafted a kicker no one liked. He was the worst rookie kicker in modern history last year, Anders Carlson. They brought in Greg Joseph, who set a record in Minnesota 2 years ago for the most game-winning kicks in a season. Had 6, I believe, game-winning kicks, including a 60-plus yarder. On cutdown day, Anders is out. The next day, after waivers, the Packers, Greg Joseph, you're out of here. Braden Arvison, undrafted free agent kicker from North Carolina State. I think he played at 3 different schools in college, was not, some highly touted guy. Didn't make the roster in Tennessee because they have Nick Folk, who kicked like 97% last year, something crazy. But his in-laws are Packer fans. And he gave a quote in the locker room this week. He said, pressure is a privilege. He's got Packer fans riled up. So let me call the shot and just say Braden Arvison makes the game winner to set up a week 1 win for the Packers. And the Eagles fans can breathe a little lightly. The sky will not be falling after the game in Brazil. but the Packers will win.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. And hey, folks, make sure to check out Peter Bukowski's host Locked On Packers podcast, because he'll have some good Eagle stuff in there for you if you want to check out what they have to say, and also check out his Locked On Sports Today. Peter, thank you for joining me here on Eye on the Enemy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
All right, well, before I give you my prediction on the Eagles game, specifically on Friday night, let me go over who I think are going to be the division winners and the wild cards in each conference. We'll start in the NFC. I'll start from the number 4 seed and work my way up. I have the Falcons winning the NFC South and finishing as the 4 seed, although there is a realistic way that the Falcons can finish as the higher seeding based on the strength of the division in which they play. It's really not a good division at all. I don't think the Buccaneers are going to be as good as they were a year ago, and the Saints and the Panthers are not really going to challenge. That could be a team that really beats up on weaker competition. They could be the top seed. Like the Falcons, I don't think are the most talented team in the NFC, but they're the most talented team in the NFC South. And given the state of that division and their strength of schedule, the Falcons could sneak their way up this not the rankings, but up the seeding. Past number. But right now I have them as the 4 seed. I have the Lions winning the NFC North, and I have them as the 3 seed. I think the Lions are probably the most talented team overall in the NFC, but they have to play in a division where you've got the Packers and an improved Bears team. And I think they're going to have some tough interdivisional games, and their schedule gets tougher this year, which is why I have the Lions as the number 3 seed, even though I do kind of think they're the best team in the conference right now. I've got the 49ers as the 2 seed, winners of the NFC West. I just don't think the Rams have enough to overtake them. And by virtue of the fact that I think the Eagles play in a weaker division as well, I think the Eagles are going to win the East, and I think they're going to finish with the best record in the NFC, because I'm not a believer in the Commanders yet. I'm not a believer in the Giants. And as you'll hear in a second, I'm not so sure the Dallas Cowboys are going to be all that good either. So I've got the Falcons winning the South, the Lions winning the North, the Niners winning the West, and the Eagles winning the East. The Eagles finishing with the best record in the NFC and that first round bye. NFC wildcards, I have the Packers finishing as the top wildcard team, like a game behind the Lions, maybe the same record and there's a tiebreaker thing. But the Packers are the top wildcard team. I have the Rams as the number 2 wildcard, and I have the Bears in as the number 3 wildcard team. I like what the Bears did this offseason. They've got some good young talent. They've got their franchise quarterback. Might be a year early to pick them to go to the playoffs, but I don't care. I think Chicago makes the postseason, which means I don't think the Cowboys make the postseason, which is why I think if you have 3 teams in the NFC East not making the playoffs, the Eagles should be able to run up their record in the division and finish with the best record in the conference, even though I don't think right now the Eagles are have the best overall roster in the NFC. But anyway, that's how I have that shaken down. You got the Packers and Bears, 2 other playoff teams. It's going to be tough for the Lions. All right, so we'll just run through the whole NFC playoff picture here. In the wild card round, the Eagles get the bye. I've got the 49ers as the 2 seed over the 7-seeded Bears. I've got the Lions as the 3 seed over the 6-seed Rams. And I've got the Packers as the 5 seed over the number 4 seed Falcons. So in the divisional round, you have the Eagles taking on the Packers in a rematch of the Friday night season opener in Brazil, and the Lions taking on the 49ers. The game, the first divisional game would be in Philadelphia. The second would be in San Francisco. I've got the Eagles over the Packers in a rematch for a trip to the NFC Championship game. And then I've got the Lions over the 49ers, the 3 seed upsetting the 2 seed in a little bit of a revenge matchup for the Lions. That's an NFC Championship game rematch, but just one round previous, which sets up an Eagles versus Lions NFC Championship game in Philadelphia. And I'm sorry, I just can't see the Lions, even though they're the better team. I think at Lincoln Financial Field, I'm taking the Eagles over the Lions to go to the Super Bowl. Yes, I am picking the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl. How much confidence do I have in that pick? Not a lot, but they have, let me put it this way about the Eagles. They have just as good a shot to get to the Super Bowl as any other team in the NFC. I really, truly believe that. If Jalen Hurts especially plays the way he's capable of playing, the Eagles have I mean, every team in the NFC has question marks. The 49ers, I think, have the best
most complete roster probably, but they've got off-field stuff going on. I'm that team, and I really do believe that Super Bowl hangover is gonna affect the 49ers in some way at some point. I don't know how I think it's really hard to scale that mountain. I mean, I know the Bills did it year after year after year, but I just don't see it for the 49ers this year. So in the AFC, I have the Jaguars winning the AFC South as the 4 seed. I've got the Ravens winning the North as the 3 seed. I've got the Bills winning the East as the 2 seed. And yes, the Kansas City Chiefs finish as the top seed, winners of the AFC West. I have your wildcard teams as the Texans, the Bengals, and the Dolphins. In the AFC wildcard round, the Chiefs get the bye. I've got the 2-seeded Bills over the 7-seeded Dolphins, the 3rd-seeded Ravens over the number 6 seed Bengals, and I've got the Texans as the 5 seed over the Jaguars as the 4 seed. In the divisional round, you've got the Texans in Kansas City to take on the Chiefs, who had the bye. Here's where I have the biggest upset of the playoffs. I am predicting a C.J. Stroud run to the Super Bowl. I've got the Texans as the 5 seed over Patrick Mahomes, and the Kansas City Chiefs as the 1 seed, a huge road playoff win for C.J. Stroud and the Texans. I have the Bills over the Ravens, which sets up an AFC championship game between the Texans and the Bills, and guess what? I'm sticking with my boys C.J. Stroud. Texans over the Bills, which sets up a Texans versus Eagles Super Bowl matchup, and I'm going to take your Philadelphia Eagles to handle the Houston Texans. Jalen Hurts gets back to the Super Bowl and this time finishes the job. This time, the Eagles have enough pieces in place. This time, all the pistons are firing for the Eagles to do it, for Jalen Hurts to win that Super Bowl title. That is how I see things shaking out by the time the season is over. As for Friday night, I think the Eagles are going to start off with a loss against the Packers here. I think that the Packers know what they're doing a little bit more than the Eagles know what they're doing at this point. The Eagles are a team, I really do think that Peter said it best. I think the Packers are kind of growing at the moment. They kind of know the direction they're going. I think the Eagles, it's still kind of a wait and see, a work in progress kind of thing. I do think as the season rolls along, the Eagles are really going to hit their stride and start to play really well. And in the playoffs, they have. They've been to the Super Bowl before. They've been to the dance. I don't know that C.J. Stroud would necessarily be intimidated by the moment, but I think Jalen Hurts has a Super Bowl victory in him, and I don't think he's ever going to have a more talented team, offensively at least, than what he has right now. So, I've got the Eagles. I got the Eagles beating the Texans, but in this game on Friday night, I think the Packers are just a little bit more ready to hit the ground running than the Eagles are. I think there's fewer uncertainties with the Packers than there are with the Eagles. So I will take the Packers to win the season opener in Brazil on Friday night. I don't think it will affect home field advantage, but it will be pretty enraging. If this was supposed to be a home game for the Eagles, this game in Brazil, if these two teams finish with the same record and the Packers beat them in Brazil, yeah, I'm going to be apoplectic. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the odds of that are small. But I do think the Packers win this game, and I think it's going to be a shootout. I would hit the over on this as well. I think you're looking at Packers 30, Eagles 26. That's how I see things shaken out here on Friday night. But don't worry, Eagles fans. I think this is going to be a loss that could even be, if not encouraging, you can at least say, okay, here's something we can build on. The schedule gets pretty easy after that. You've got the Atlanta Falcons at home. You're in New Orleans. You're in Tampa. Tampa could be a tough game, but I have the Eagles winning that one. I have the Eagles winning their next 5 after losing the opener. I've got them winning versus Atlanta, in New Orleans, in Tampa, at home against Cleveland, and then at the New York Giants. So I have the Eagles getting off to a 5-1 start because the schedule does lighten up quite a bit after the opening game against Green Bay. All right, gang, that's going to do it for this edition of Eye on the Enemy, and I hope you've been enjoying all of the podcasts here at the Eagles Pinpull Network as we are getting you ready for what I think is going to be an exciting and fun-filled 2024 Philadelphia Eagles season. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time right here on Eye on the Enemy.